My name's Alika Thompson, and I'm the Quality Systems Administrator, like she said. So the goal that they gave me, or I kind of helped develop a wildly important goal, was the 100% process quality. So we can increase the speed. We just want to rocket parts through the floor, out the door. And we make aerospace parts, biopharmaceutical parts, chemical parts, like we do roto-molding, roto-lining, and 3D printing. And we do, what did I say? Aerospace, biopharma, chemical, and semiconductor. So we do manufacturing. Is that what you guys, manufacturing, labs, what do you guys do? Manufacturing. Lab. Cool. So yeah, and the other really unique thing I think about our company is most of the time in the other companies that I've worked for, they do really large volume. Like the same types of people do the same thing over and over again. We do really low volume stuff. So we'll do 7 to 21 parts before we completely change out the process, and we do a whole different part for a different customer. And then we'll do 7 to 21 parts and then change again. And we do all of those different things with 80 people. So from the COO down to the frontline workers, we have about 80 people. So here is the slide from the sales guys that they wanted to make sure I shared with you. We are ISO 9001 and AS 9100 compliance, among other things. We have NADCAP, FAA. I mainly work right now with the aerospace side of things, and I'm just starting to come over and learn more about the biopharma and semicon processes and help out with them there. And so I'm getting to learn more about that. Let's see. I wrote some things down to make sure I didn't forget everything. So, well, that presents a few challenges for us. The whole 80 people, 4 industries, 3 different value streams. And we work in, obviously, a really lean environment. And in my opinion, being in a lean environment doesn't mean that everybody that is in management up has to work 90 hours a week. You still want to go home at 5 o'clock in the evening and not have mountains of paperwork waiting for you, or not be ISO compliant at the end of the day. And that's where Qualtrax comes in. We can put mechanisms in place to build a simplified future so that the things that need to happen the right way every time, and you can go home knowing that you're ready. So that's what we're doing. And so all these different customers build what I call the specification spider web. We have customer drawings that call out specifications, and those of you in manufacturing, I'm sure you guys labs have specifications as well that you have to deal with, right? And sometimes they call it other specifications, and then from that you build SOPs and work instructions and forms, and then they're all intermingled, and it's like, when one of these customer changes comes in, how do we manage that change? How are we managing our change control? So that's what I'm going to share with you, what we do. We have a couple questions that come to us when a specification changes. Like, that's one of the other things that I do. I make sure that all of our documents are up to date. So when something changed, what changed about that specification? Does that change impact anything we do? If so, what part numbers are impacted? And did we write a work instruction or operating procedure for this? How do we communicate this change to everyone involved? And did those actions get done? How many of you guys use like Outlook action items and flags and the reminders that come back? Nobody? Like, oh, a couple. It's like nobody. Everybody remembers what to do. Am I the only one? So I do that too. But Qualtrax can help us track those actions specific to people so that we don't have to necessarily have it inside of the Outlook. And then it's documented as well. So all right. So it's kind of hard to make one workflow do all of those things for us. So I use a combined approach. We have the specification and drawing revision review workflow, a where used database workflow, and a quality alert workflow. So the spec and drawing revision review answers questions 1 and 6. What changed, and did the actions get done? The where used database answers questions 2 and 3. Does this change affect anything we do? And if so, what part numbers does it answer? And the quality alert answers question 5. Did we communicate that change to everyone? And then we use Qualtrax's built-in document control system. And I think you guys all did the doc control this morning, where they talked about dependencies and stuff and how that all interlinks together, maybe? Yes? I'll show you a little bit about how we use it here. And we can kind of dive in deeper as you guys have questions. So the specification and drawing review workflow. These are a couple of the things that I use inside this workflow. We have automation steps, the subform-based workflow launcher, child workflows. I use route exceptions and the workflow expirations. Are you guys familiar with some of those? Or? Yeah. And this is what it looks like. So what I really didn't want to have happen is that I didn't want to, when something revs, I didn't want to have to force every department to read every spec or drawing. But sometimes every different department has to read it. So I put in the workflow, the route exceptions, excuse me, to jump if it didn't need to go to the different departments. So the engineering review has a list field that says send to quality, yes, no. Send to production, yes, no. Send to sales, yes, no. And depending on those answers is where it goes. But you can only skip one step. So if it skips quality, then it goes to the skip department step. And then I push it forward if it needs to go to sales, production, or just go ahead and start launching those child workflows based on what they've answered there. So you may be wondering why I used child workflows instead of just using one built together workflow. And the answer is a couple reasons. First, I wanted to save engineers time and money. Well, time, money is time. And eliminate confusion later on because I use the same workflow instance every time that spec changes. I go back and just remove the action items and leave the impact overview there. So I don't have quality pulling up an old rev and looking at that and saying, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Because I include in the workflow, give us some Cliff's notes. Well, how does this impact us? And I'll jump into that workflow itself. But by using the child workflows, the actions stay, the actions stay there. We have those tracked in the child workflow and they close out and stay, but we can erase the main workflow. Also, it moves the workflow along. So when we're waiting on somebody to get something done, we don't have to wait to send it off to quality. So that's why we do that. Here's the rest of the workflow. So I have it launches to the quality alert. If we need to use that based on, it's not like I don't use the route exception for that, I just use the configuration. The same with the action items. If there's any action items, that it launches those. And then I enter the IDs of the child workflows right into the workflow itself, the main one, so that it's easier to grab if you're in an audit. And he's like, oh, show me how 2 revisions ago you handled those action items. Then we can just see where they are and type them in and pull them up. So it's a little bit faster. All right, let's jump into that workflow. So this is what they were, oh, it doesn't do it. My settings. Extend these displays. Duplicate?
Duplicate, yeah.
There we are. Keep changes. Now okay. There we are. Yay. I was going to do screenshots of it and just be able to stay inside of the PowerPoint, but I thought it's easier to just really see it. So this is what I send off to engineering. And I've got right here, I've got the spec name. We've got Tesla 5307. And I'm telling them it's now Rev C. I can enter where the spec and drawing is located, so I can put the link to the document right there. If I have a due date, if they need to get it done really fast, then it makes it red, like if it's a really important spec, because I read these too. So I scan them before I send them to engineering so I can kind of give them a heads up of what's going on. I assign it to the engineer, and this lets them tell me if it's not relevant. Sometimes we get I have specs on my list of Rev that aren't relevant anymore. We're not making those parts. And so I can just use that to pull them off my active list. And then here's that impact overview. So when I was working, they cross-trained me in a whole bunch of departments. They cross-trained me in sales and as a quality inspector. And then I also do the document control and the specs and the Qualtrax. So when I was working as a quality inspector, I noticed that sometimes they would just call out the spec, build per spec. And then as an inspector, we'd have to go and read the spec to figure out what the quality control information was. And so this way they can just read it right here and it's pulled out, bam. This is how you prepare it. This is how you wrap it. And this is the two different codes. Because sometimes we have they'll call it a spec, but then it'll be code Z or code A. And it gives a different variation for how to do that specific part. So in this example, I'm going to follow TSLA 5307 all the way through my whole presentation so you can see what would happen. So Rev C changes section 3 code Z. That's all that changed in this guy. And down here it was, I'll bring it up, it was green tape and now it's pink camo tape. So we just have to change the color of tape, the type of tape that we use when we apply this insulation to these tubes. So we make tubes sometimes, then we put insulation on them and we tape them. So I was trying to come up with a really simple example that didn't get too involved. So this is what the engineers would fill out. Are there action items? Yes. And this would be going to perhaps the buyer. We'd give him a heads up. Camo tape is this material spec type 1, please order ASAP, and it's attached to these parts. And then we enter the person who will be responsible for that action item here in the subform. Generate a quality alert. We would need to generate an alert to let some targeted people know that this is changing, like our production floor, the quality people. Hey, you're going to start seeing pink camo, not green. It's not wrong. It's right. And perhaps maybe the managers and the warehouse. We're giving them a heads up that the work orders are going to change. We can enter the groups here. You can just start typing a group name, pull it up. And this is what the notification is. And finally, is an ECC required? We have to change the work orders, so that would be an engineering change notice. And so we're just going to create a little child workflow that'll launch off the ECC. I also have some things like the material storage or handling requirements, so we can make sure that we keep a handle on that as well. And this is where those list fields are. I'm going to skip, for this guy, I'm going to skip all the other departments. So send to production, send to quality, send to sales. I still have to, because of the way it's set up, I still have to put a name in there, even though it's not going to go to them, because it's a required field. If the answer is yes, then it needs to have a name in there, and the required doesn't have that logic built in. It just knows that you either need the name to assign it or you don't need the name. So I just popped in my name, and then I hit engineering review done, submit. Oh, I'm missing a value. Oh, is it relevant? Yes, it's relevant. I love how it says required, so that as you're going through it, you know you have to fill it out. All right, so what's happening in the background is this guy. We just looked at the engineering review, and now it's going to go to skip departments because the answer to, it would launch that ECC, and then it'll skip quality, and then it'll go to the skip department step, and then we're going to launch it from there to launch that quality alert. So let's refresh our screen here. And there's our ECC. And I don't actually have the ECC in here, so I just created a like little tiny baby workflow just to launch something. And then here it is in the skip department step. And in theory, I didn't fill out the engineering part. So this would come to me and I would just push it forward and say, okay, nobody else needs to do it. So go to launch steps. And so now what it's doing is it's launching that quality alert and it's going to go forward from there and launch that single action item. Where's that? There's my quality alert. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, though. There's the assign action item. So when you use a subform, I don't know if you guys have run into this, but if you use a subform to assign the action item, it doesn't actually, you can't assign it to that person right away. You have to use another custom field that's outside the subform. But I like having it in the subform because if I have multiple people responsible for multiple steps, then I've still got them tied together and I can just see it in an overview. Oh, this person was responsible for this person was responsible for that, and I don't have to go into each instance so that I can see what's responsible for it. So you just assign the person here. And then I also have a verification action owner, like who's gonna get this step after I do it. And we fire it off. And it's a really simple workflow at that point. It's just, did you do it? Upload documentation if you needed to. Sometimes it's training, like go out and really talk to the people on the floor about whatever. This type of action item can be launched from a car or anything like that. So if it's go out there and talk to them, then you might get something signed if you talk to them in person instead of launching the corrective action. Or you could upload, hey, we talked to this provider and this is the response. And then you just complete the actions out. All right, does that make sense? Pretty straightforward. Any questions about the spec review workflow? Yes?
Do you use, when you pull in your report?
Yeah. So this guy I don't really run reports on. It's just inside of Qualtrax because I haven't really needed to. But what I want the quality people, or if production has a question, I want them to come here and just type that in. Like, what was I supposed to do to build this? And now there's a work instruction and there's a work order and there's all that information available to them as well. But sometimes it doesn't all get put on that work order. And so this way they can come in here and just pull it up. Oh, there's the spec. Not that guy, but there it is. Where is it? There it is, workflows. And there it is. So they can always go and look at that revision review and see what was going on with that spec when the engineers reviewed it. Because something I just ran into, quality was always asking engineering, what does this mean? What does this mean? And I'm like, you should really write that down and put it in a document that people can reference. And it can be easily updated. Even in the close field, the engineers can go in there and make changes anytime. So, oh, and the final thing, I bring it back. So, I think I moved forward. So I close it out, I enter those child IDs, and then I close it out. And I just use the workflow expiration, and when this spec revs to rev D, I'll go in and enter today's date, and then it'll come back to engineering, and they can start the process over. But that way they have that jumping off point. Like, this is what was going on with it before. They could read the new specs and say, okay, this is what's changed. There's usually rev bars, but they're not 100%. So it's always nice to know where they're at, and they don't have to re-enter that information.
Do that overwrite your previous record?
It does, but we don't want, we don't want more like old data being referenced by quality or production. So we use those child workflows to hold the data for auditing purposes. Like we'll talk about the quality alert. So we wanted everybody to know. When they sign off on that quality alert, then we have that electronic signature from Rev C and the action item from Rev C that's tied to that. And those stay inside of Qualtrax. But when it goes to Rev D, then the revision itself, the review, changes to say what's new about with Rev D and what's current with Rev D. So if they change their mind from pink camo to neon green camo tape, then they would just use neon green to camo tape. Does that make sense? So yeah.
I was trying to understand is, apparently you keep a document outside of your workflow that keeps your history changes of the specifications?
Well, we have I have the spec in there as well. Like that's what I pulled up originally when I went to pull up the.
Right.
So the spec is there from the customer, and it has the little rev bars on the side, but it doesn't have document change control the way Qualtrax does. I wish it did. I wish they would go in and highlight all the areas, and you could just see what they changed, because they put a little like black bar sometimes depending on the customer, next to the changed areas. But I found it over and over again where it's not always accurate. They changed sections and forgot the rev bar. And so you have to catch it. Like it's not on them to put the rev bars in, it's on us to read it and know what it says. So, so we have the current specification for people to read if they wanted to do that as well. Is that, or were you thinking more like Qualtrax's?
Make a little bit of sense there.
Yeah.
I was just trying to understand, I mean, it's a change, and the document control feature this is something more than a document control feature.
Yeah, this is how we handle like change coming into our company from the outside. Mm-hmm. So obviously we use Qualtrax's document control for our documents on the inside, but when it comes from the outside, then it doesn't have, we have to figure out what changed. Okay. If they would just use Qualtrax, then yeah, they could send us their revved, they could link it, and we would have all that information, and it would make our lives a lot easier. But they don't, so we figure it out, and then we break it down for people, because they can use 10 pages to say wear gloves, use ISO, and wipe it down. Sometimes, when you break it down to what they really are saying for the production floor, like they don't want to read 10 pages to figure out how to clean a part. You know, they've got 7 of them to clean and ship, and we ship over 500 parts a day. So, I mean, we have parts flying through, and we have to really rapidly give them the information. So, so my where used database, this connects what parts we use, what parts we make to the customer documents, the drawings, the specifications, everything that's called out. This is a really simple workflow. I launch it, either I'm putting parts in myself. We have a new product development workflow that launches when we reach a certain point in that stage, when we get to the document review stage of the new product development. And we also have a part audit for like legacy parts, where the engineers are bringing those in, they're running through it, they're checking to make sure everything's accurate still. And so when that runs, when they do that audit, then it launches one of these to make sure that we have them in. I have 2 subforms in the enter parts specs and customer documents, one for documents and one for specs. And then I double check, and then it closes out. And this guy doesn't ever come back. It's just always editable if something changes, if they add a spec or something. But it doesn't need to come back and go back through the review. And then I always just keep 1 instance per part, so we don't duplicate. Oh, we're supposed to jump into it. So this is what this looks like. So they put in their part number. They have different program codes, like different airplane parts. Like what airplane is this going on? Is it going on the helicarrier, the Milano? So I switched all of our document names and everything to Avengers references and Star Wars references. And so they can select that, and they can multi-select, control-click, if there's more than one plane that it goes on. And then they just enter all the documents. You know, this is the doc name, it's a data list. And I use this workflow, I run reports off of this, so that when I go into the customer portal, I say, these are all the documents that are from this customer, and I can get those from this portal. So then I have a big list, and I go and I compare them. Sometimes they let me have like auto tell me if they rev them, but a lot of it's right now, it's real manual. So I have to just look. But having a list next to me is really fast and easy. And then they enter the specifications. What's the spec that's being called out? Is there a type or class that it's going to? And then if it goes down the rabbit hole, they can call it out right here. Or if it's a superseding, that way we know why we're looking at that spec, because it's not on the front page of those parts lists. And then they think they've had a mistake. They put a mistake in, and it's not. It just went down the rabbit hole, 1 level or 2 levels. So we can record it right here, so when we're looking at it, we know why. And then we've got our responsible parties. And I send it to a second, I do send it to a second reviewer, either me or to quality, the quality engineer. And this is what it looks like. So when this guy downloads into the report, this is what it looks like. We've got all those different custom fields. And I love this about, I love you Qualtrax developers, they put the subforms. If you have subforms in your workflow, they'll be here on different worksheets. And so these two worksheets here are what I use to make my databases. I just run a macro that changes this row into RMB part number, and then it does a VLOOKUP right here. Just do it. RMB. So what this does is it breaks out all the different rows in a subform into a different row, 1 row per subform row. Does that make sense? You guys have seen these, right? You know what I'm talking about here? Yes? No? Yeah. Okay. So I just connect the two, because I don't need to know what instance ID, I need to know what part number. Oh, wait a minute. I like tables. Turn it into a table. Here's my specs, I turn that into a table. It just makes the code cleaner. I don't know why. So I just tell it to look at this at the instance ID and just connect the two. And I do the same thing with the program code, but I think you guys are following, right? Maybe? No? Print 2, okay. So this is it. I mean, it's really simple. So we had that TSLA 5307. Now we just go here and filter by it. Those are all the parts that call out TSLA 5307. And we just had code Z change. So those are the 2 parts that engineering has to look at. And if they needed to, if there were comments there, then they would have those as well. But it makes what used to be a little bit more time-consuming process way faster. And I had a database like this prior to Qualtrax, but the engineers didn't like it because it wasn't clean enough. So now it's really, really pretty, and it's easy for them to enter the information, so I like it a lot more. It's not just on me to enter all that information. They can enter it, and it drops in. And then I just keep running this report whenever they need it. They can run it, or I can run it. And that's how we get that. Questions about this guy? How we connect those guys together? The specs and the drawings and the parts?
So what were you doing prior to, how'd you map that out?
Oh, how did I do it in my old database?
Yeah, so what did it look like prior to, as far as that workflow?
Oh, prior to using Qualtrax, or? Well, so I didn't have a workflow. So I just had like the part number here, And then I put the drawing number, revision, and I had like 3 or 4 drawing numbers in one row. And then I'd have in that same row, so I just had a whole bunch. And then the specs, I had process specs, and then I had them all together.
And where were you pulling that data?
The parts list, the customer drawing, I read all the engineering documents. So I would read the engineering drawings, I'd read the parts lists, the data lists, all those different documents, and then I'd read the specs, and then they'd call out specs. Yes?
So you manually created a
Yeah.
file?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That was only 300. I only got like 350 parts into that. The specifications prior to doing them into Qualtrax, I did those manually. We had 2,300 specs. No, 2,800 specs, which I opened every single one and typed in spec name, deviations called out, and what current rev we're using, because we didn't have that prior to. I was like, we need to know that. Like, I can't. For me to go in every single time and try to figure out which, of these thousands of specs that the customer is publishing has revved and what's affecting us, and then I have to go see if we've got the right one. And so, yeah, that was one of my first tasks at RMB. And then I was like, well, if we don't know what rev we're on and we need to develop that a little bit better and cleaner, then we should probably figure out what parts we're using and connect those to the specs so that when we do rev, we're going to know what part. That's going to be the next question that the engineers are going to have is, oh, we've got to change this part mark. Well, what parts need the part mark change? So, yeah.
What kind of impact did this have on you? Probably a huge.
Well, the first time it came up, I was in a meeting with one of our engineers, and it was a part mark spec change. And he started to say, do we have any idea what part? And he kind of started trailing off. And the sales guy said, Alika does. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah, you just filter by. And he just like, oh, because it was a really big, it was like, and we could narrow it down. Like, it wasn't like we had no idea. We could certainly find them, but it was a cumbersome process prior. Because we know what customer it was. We knew, what division it was for, and so we could start narrowing it down, but it was still like, we should figure that out. So I'm like, we should write that down. I say that all the time there. We should write that down and make it available for everybody. And then document dependencies, if you did the doc control, then you probably saw this guy here. If you use dependencies, when you take the spec out into revision, it calls out, I used manual to get this to show up, manual file transfer. And it just says, these are the dependent documents. You've got 2 SOPs and a test form. So when I pull the spec into revision status, I update the spec, and then I send for approval, but I don't approve it. So the spec and the documents all go into edit. So they go to the document manager to be looked at, and then they know that the spec is revving, and they look at it. And if nothing changes, then we just close it out, and we don't have to rev those SOPs. But if there is a change, then they can do that at the same time. And it lets them know immediately that that's all what needs to be reviewed. And then if you have a training or a test attached to it, then that would push out to your people as well. I'm going to kind of skip over document because you guys the Qualtrax is doing a great job of talking about it. But unless you guys specifically have questions about it, like how we use it in that form. No. All right. Oh, and then I use it for document spec rev. And then you just use a custom field that tells you what the customer's current rev is. And then when you run the report, you've got your list, which is what I did really, really manually in the beginning. I think it took me 2 months. I got part-time work on that end. So probably, I don't know how many hours, 200, 300 hours. I was just opening documents and reading them. All right, and finally, the quality alert. So we needed a way to really rapidly let people know that there was a change coming, a customer complaint. We use this for a lot of things, not just the spec review, that there was a customer complaint, there's a corrective action, there's a change coming. I guess those are the only things I can think of that we'd be using it for. But it was when we didn't need like formal training or to create a formal training or testing, because it was one time and now the SOP is going to update and they're going to have that information. But we wanted, sometimes it takes a little while to get documents revised. And so this rapidly lets people know, and we could target it to specific groups in the company without having to send it to everybody. Because that's what they would do in the past. If a customer would complain about something, like they didn't like the way a box had been packed, everybody in the company found out about it, which meant nobody was reading emails that came like that because they were just getting inundated with emails that had nothing to do with them. And so the stuff that did have to do with them, they were just skipping over because it was like auto filter to trash. And so now they know if something's coming to them, it affects you, please stop, read, and pay attention. And I also wanted to have electronic signatures, some way of like tracking that everyone did read this, did close it out, and if we needed to, come back and do additional training, we could say, well, you read this document, and this is what it looks like. I entered the information, it goes out in a quality notification, and then they close it out, each person, by saying, by clicking on the link that says, I've read and understood this notification. And then I just have the link set that route to require all. And so it sits in my inbox, open instance, until everybody closes it out. So you can see that it hasn't been done or it has been done. And this is what that history looks like. I'm like, hey, that history will give us that timestamp. So if an auditor asks, show me how you documented, this gives us that everybody had been trained. Another question that...
How do you validate that against your employee list? Or right?
Yes, that, they immediately asked me that. How do we know? Because they're assigning it to groups. So who's in what group, or what groups are people in? And so I made just an Excel table that's filterable by group name. This I filtered by LS, by our 3D people, and so materials tech came up too, because I just typed in LS. But we've got our LS manager, Paul Harvey, and then our LS techs, obviously. This is what, no. But yeah, and then it goes back and forth, and I'm the only person that can edit groups right now. As we're getting people trained and more comfortable with it, then I'll trust them to edit the group. So aha, guys, I would love to be able to just run that report right inside of Qualtrax. You can run the group membership, but it tells you just what groups are assigned to things. The custom script, it'll tell you that the LS tech group is assigned to these, as a responsible party for these workflows and these documents and things like that. But you can't go back and forth just and see who's in what group and what group people are in without having to kind of dig for that information. So I just publish this on our Qualtrax site, and they can download it and filter back and forth. And people aren't, we're a pretty small company. We don't have people hopping all over, and it doesn't require a lot of changes for us. Well, other questions?